I was reading a blog on diabetes self-management. It's by a guy, I think his name's Andy. But he called pulling the D card, where he'd get a telephone solicitation call at night, asking, he goes, "But I'm a diabetic." And the people would just go into a trance and go, "Oh, okay," and hang up.
Oh, that's
and
funny.
I was thinking maybe of trying, or you don't have to say I'm a diabetic, you can say, "But I've got diabetes." Or maybe you could have told the bartender that. It probably completely...
Well, it might have stopped him, but at that point, sometimes you feel like explaining yourself and having this big conversation about diabetes, and sometimes you don't.
Right.
And
it's like I'm just trying to get on with my life.
I'm just trying to have a drink with a friend here, and it's sort of like, really interesting the reactions you get. But, I try not to use it as an excuse for anything, even in my own mind. But sometimes I'll pull that card, and I want to get away from someone. I'll say, "Oh, I need to eat now." Diabetic. That kind of thing.
Have you had the experience of going low at night, like waking up? And then the whole next day sometimes is a drag because you burnt up a lot of hormones or something in the middle of the night.
Early on, I don't remember anyone really clearly explaining to me that, you might wake up just in a pool of sweat. And I would have all these nights where I was just having these horrible night sweats and, having funny, strange dreams. But by the time I would actually get up in the morning and test, I would be back up. So I didn't realize that I was having these, relatively severe lows in the night until I finally mentioned it to some doctor, and they said, "Oh, So I think there's a lot of things people don't tell you that you just need to figure out on your own.
Yeah.
But
so you needed to cut back on your insulin.
Yeah. Initially, and now I think this is a bit dangerous, but initially, after I was diagnosed, I had been in the hospital for a week, and then I came out and I went to see this endocrinologist, and he just sort of guessed on how many units of insulin he thought I would need for each meal. So, let's see, breakfast, about 4, and lunch, lunch, that could be a big meal, so how about 6, and then for dinner, about 7. Well, it turned out at that time that if I took 1 unit for breakfast, that was more than enough. So I was having low after low after low, and, I didn't know anything. I was still early into this, and I thought, this is miserable. I would end up all shaky after every meal, and so learning to count carbs and to figure out my own doses was huge for me. I think people need to be, that's to me a perfect instance where you cannot be dependent on your doctor. And just recently I've realized that the ratios that I was using weren't tight enough, and I was just going too high after every meal. So I just sort of self-adjusted. I used to be 1 to 20 for breakfast, 1 to 15 for lunch, and 1 to 12. So I just took it down a notch, and it's actually worked quite well.
So just for our viewers, that means you would take 1 unit for every 12 grams of carbohydrate you were eating.
Right. So
we don't want them to think you took anywhere between 1 to 12 units.
No, sorry. 1 to 12 being a ratio. So, how many for each, for each.
Like a piece of toast is 15 grams of carbs, which means a little more than 1 unit you would need to cover that.
Right.
Or maybe more in the morning if you're insulin resistant.
Right. No, I tended to be really insulin sensitive in the morning because the Lantus was still working.
Okay.
Everybody's different. That's just it.
Yeah.
You kind of have to experiment and, try to figure it out. But another thing I've done recently, which I probably should have done earlier, was purchase a food scale so I could really check my carb counting skills. And because sometimes, as you know, you eat the same thing and you take the same amount of insulin and you still get a different outcome. So, you have to sort of sometimes, double check whether you're actually doing the math right. And maybe it was just that you were fighting off a cold that day, or, you're overtired or whatever. There could be other things at work.
Right.
But you want to make sure that you're somewhat accurate in your dosing skills.
So do you use the scale now? Because I'm allergic to those. That just represents being in jail almost.
Oh, see, that's how I always felt about it. I thought, that's going to be the last straw where I have to stand in my kitchen and weigh food. It's just ridiculous. But, I have to say I got so frustrated because I had a period where every day was just this bounce fest. I would go from, 60 to 260, and then I'd go back down to 70, and then, up and down, up and down. I thought, I can't live like this. It was really out of necessity. And now that I have it, I've sort of, I know an average size of the apples that we usually purchase. And so now I know how much it really weighs, how many carbs are really in that apple. So I don't have to weigh every apple now.
So how much insulin do you take for an apple?
So the apples, they tell you a small apple is 15 grams of carb. Well, that must be, Minnie Mouse apple, because a real apple, a regular apple, which is usually about so big,
right,
is about 38.45
Really?
You know, the ones that we have, when I weigh them on my scale, it tells me it's like around 38 grams of carbs. So I'm not talking about the little gala apples. I'm still talking about, you know, not the giant, but somewhere in between.
Yeah, medium size.
You know, nice sizable apple. And I was, wow, that's almost 40 carbs. So, you know, now I know that. So now I eat half of it, and I know, okay, that's 20 carbs.
Yeah.
You know, so.
And so that would be over a unit?
Yeah, well, it depends what meal it is. But
if it's lunch.
Yeah, so for breakfast I could do, you know, I'm 1 to 15, so if I had a 20 carbs, that's one and over a unit, right? A little over a unit. So it's been helpful, and you know, I don't want to say that I'm gonna, you know, stand there and weigh every morsel, but it definitely has helped me. And there's some foods you just don't know. You know, the soup, for example, is really hard. I found that like different kinds of rice have a really different, like whether it's wild rice or risotto rice, or you know, the sort of Chinese white rice. I would always sort of think rice is rice, and so I would always sort of make the same estimate, but I found that they had a wildly different effect on my blood sugar. So when you have a scale like that, you can actually look up the type of rice, you know, measure it, and it's like, okay, risotto has a lot more carbs than wild rice, a lot more. You know, so it's just been helpful to sort of test my skills, and you know, it's still new, so I'm still playing with that toy, you know, but that'll wear off after a while too.
Right. That's another word. It's like the perfection, or the perfect diabetic.
If that's all you did, I mean, if you just spent all your time doing it.
Yeah.
But I mean, my thing is too that, you know, there's always something new you can try, and if you find that you're not getting good results, it's like, okay, so what haven't I tried yet? And for me, one thing I hadn't tried yet was weighing food. I thought, well, let me give this a try and see if it makes a difference. And, you know, and it was worth it, you know, to do it for a while.
And mainly for the carbs. You don't need to measure protein.
If you're a very low
carb
person, I'm not too concerned about fat or, you know, fat content or calories, because I'm not trying to lose weight, and, you know, it's not an issue. But it would be very helpful for someone doing that, because you can know exactly how many, you know, fat, how much protein,
how many calories,
fiber. You know, the new scales they have are so high tech, and they've got a database of, you know, 1,000 foods in there, so very helpful. Yeah.
Where'd you get yours from?
I actually
Diabetes
ordered mine
Mall?
off Diabetes Mall, in the internet, diabetesmall.net. They have a great array of stuff, and I shop almost everything off the internet. Big internet fan, and so you can comparison shop. And I looked around, and they definitely had the best price on the one. And I sort of chose a middle ground. I didn't want the super high tech $200 with all these crazy features that I wouldn't use. But I also didn't want the old-fashioned one with the bin. You know, I wanted something digital. And I wanted one that had a database of foods, so that all you have to do is plug in the code.
And it tells you how many carbs?
And it tells you how many carbs, how much salt, how much fiber. You know, it's actually fascinating.
I didn't know that either.
My children love to play with it. My daughter kept trying to measure her. She has a signature sandwich she makes out of salami and strawberry jam. And I kept trying to convince her there's no code for that sandwich. But it's pretty fascinating, actually. It's, you know, surprising. Some things that you think are really high fat aren't, and, you know, some things that you think don't have that much salt have a ton of salt. So it's really eye-opening. Because I always wonder a little bit on the packaging too, how accurate those numbers are. You know, because for most people it just gives you somewhat of an idea, but for us, we need to know precisely how many carbs are in there, right?
Right.
So.